A little beggar girl interrupts a business meeting and shouts at the millionaire, "Don't sign that contract." What the millionaire discovers afterward leaves him completely shocked. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The harsh winter wind whipped through the narrow alleyways of New York City, carrying with it the bitter chill of despair. Huddled in a doorway, her small frame barely visible beneath layers of tattered clothing, sat 8-year-old Lily Carter. Her bright blue eyes, once full of childish wonder, now held a weariness far beyond her years as she watched the bustling crowds hurry past, oblivious to her presence. Lily's stomach growled, a painful reminder of the meager breakfast she'd shared with her mother that morning. A single stale bagel scavenged from a dumpster behind a nearby cafe. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, trying to trap what little warmth remained in her body. The icy concrete beneath her seeped through her worn shoes, numbing her toes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, Lily knew it was time to move. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. The local shopkeepers had grown weary of her presence, often shooing her away with harsh words and threatening gestures. With a deep sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, she pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the ache in her joints from sitting for so long. Lily's mind wandered to her mother, Sarah, lying ill in their makeshift shelter beneath an overpass. The image of her mother's pale face and sunken cheeks haunted her every waking moment, driving her forward with a determination that belied her young age. She had to find help, had to find a way to save her mother from the illness that threatened to take her away forever. As she walked, her eyes scanned the ground, ever vigilant for any coins or discarded food that might have been overlooked by others. It was a skill she had honed over the past 6 months, since that fateful day when everything had changed. Lily's thoughts drifted back to the life they'd had before, a modest apartment, warm meals, and the security of her father's loving embrace. But all that had been stripped away in an instant. The memory of her father's face, twisted with anguish as he realized they had lost everything, still brought tears to her eyes. He had been so sure, so confident in the investment opportunity that promised to secure their future. Instead, it had left them destitute, cast out onto the unforgiving streets of the city they once called home. Lily shook her head, forcing the painful memories away. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Her mother needed her to be strong, to find a way out of this nightmare. With renewed determination, she quickened her pace, her small hand clutching the few coins she'd managed to collect throughout the day. As she rounded a corner, the imposing silhouette of Cartwright Tower loomed before her, its gleaming glass facade a stark contrast to the gritty reality of the streets below. Lily had heard whispers among the other homeless in the area about the man who owned the building, Julian Cartwright, a business tycoon known for his ruthless tactics and cold demeanor. For a moment, Lily allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to live in such a place, warm and safe from the hardships of the streets. But the fantasy was short-lived as a gust of wind cut through her thin clothing, reminding her of the harsh reality she faced. With a deep breath, Lily steeled herself for the task ahead. She needed to find more money, more food, anything that could help her mother survive another day. The thought of losing her only remaining parent was too much to bear, and it fueled a fire within her that refused to be extinguished. As she approached the entrance to Cartwright Tower, Lily's keen eyes spotted a group of well-dressed businessmen exiting the building. Their laughter and carefree demeanor stood in stark contrast to the weight of worry that burdened her young shoulders. For a split second, their eyes met hers, and Lily saw a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or discomfort, before they quickly averted their gaze and hurried past. In that moment, a plan began to form in Lily's mind. The tower, with its opulent lobby and constant stream of wealthy occupants, might hold the key to helping her mother. If she could find a way inside, perhaps she could appeal to someone's kindness or find some overlooked opportunity to gather the resources they so desperately needed. With her heart pounding and her palms sweating despite the cold, Lily inched closer to the revolving doors of Cartwright Tower. She knew the risks were great. She could be caught, thrown out, or worse. But the image of her mother, growing weaker by the day, steeled her resolve. Taking a deep breath, Lily summoned every ounce of courage in her small body. She had faced the cruelty of the streets and the bitter sting of loss. Surely she could face whatever lay behind those gleaming doors. With one last glance at the bustling street behind her, Lily stepped forward, ready to embark on a journey that would change her life forever. As the revolving door began to turn, carrying her into the warmth of the lobby, Lily couldn't have known that her simple act of desperation was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Cartwright Tower and the lives of everyone within it. 52 floors above the streets where Lily fought for survival, Julian Cartwright stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, his steely gaze sweeping over the city he considered his kingdom. At 45, Julian was the epitome of success. Impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his salt-and-pepper hair perfectly coiffed, exuding an aura of power and control that was palpable to anyone who entered his presence. The office around him was a testament to his wealth and influence. Sleek modern furniture, priceless art adorning the walls, and a desk large enough to land a small aircraft. Yet, despite the opulence surrounding him, Julian felt a gnawing emptiness that he couldn't quite shake. A sharp knock on the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he barked, not bothering to turn around. His assistant, a nervous young man named David, entered the room, clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Cartwright, sir, the investors from Shanghai have arrived. They're waiting in the main conference room." Julian's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This meeting could make or break Cartwright Industries' expansion into the Asian market, a move that would cement his status as one of the most powerful businessmen in the world. He had worked tirelessly for months to arrange this deal, pulling strings and calling in favors to get these elusive investors to the table. "Very well," Julian replied, his voice cool and measured. "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Make sure everything is prepared exactly as I specified." David nodded frantically, already backing towards the door. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Right away." As the door closed behind his assistant, Julian allowed himself a moment to close his eyes and take a deep breath. He thought back to the early days of his career, when he had been driven by a passion for innovation and a desire to make a difference in the world. Somewhere along the way, that passion had been replaced by an insatiable hunger for power and success. Pushing those thoughts aside, Julian straightened his tie and strode out of his office, his footsteps echoing through the hallways as employees scrambled to appear busy in his presence. The fear and respect in their eyes should have filled him with satisfaction, but instead it left him feeling oddly hollow. As he approached the conference room, Julian could hear the low murmur of voices from within. He paused for a moment, hand on the door handle, and allowed a mask of confident charm to settle over his features. With one last deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice commanding immediate attention, "welcome to Cartwright Tower. I trust your journey was pleasant?" The group of Chinese businessmen rose to greet him, their faces a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Julian moved around the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with practiced ease. As he took his seat at the head of the table, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. This was where he thrived, in the heat of negotiation, where millions of dollars hung in the balance. "Now," Julian began, leaning forward slightly, "let's discuss the future of sustainable energy in Asia and how Cartwright Industries can help shape that future." As the meeting progressed, Julian found himself slipping into the familiar rhythm of deal-making. He presented projections, fielded questions, and subtly maneuvered the conversation to highlight the strengths of his proposal. The investors seemed impressed, their initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set outside the towering windows, Julian could sense that victory was within reach. The lead investor, Mr. Zhang, leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Cartwright," he said, his accent thick but his English impeccable, "your proposal is certainly intriguing. However, we have some concerns about the potential risks involved." Julian's mind raced, anticipating the objections before they were voiced. He had prepared for this, had contingencies in place for every possible scenario. With a confident smile, he began to address their concerns one by one, his words weaving a tapestry of assurance and promise. As he spoke, Julian couldn't help but feel a twinge of something unfamiliar, a flicker of doubt that he quickly suppressed. He had built his empire on deals like this, on his ability to persuade and manipulate. But for the first time in years, he found himself wondering about the true cost of his success. The meeting stretched on into the night, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of stars. Julian's throat was dry from talking, but he pushed on, determined to close the deal. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Mr. Zhang nodded slowly. "Very well, Mr. Cartwright. We are prepared to move forward with the initial stages of the agreement. Our legal team will draw up the necessary documents." A surge of triumph coursed through Julian's veins, but it was tempered by an unexpected sense of unease. He had won, as he always did, but the victory felt somehow hollow. As the investors filed out of the room, shaking hands and exchanging business cards, Julian remained seated, staring at the papers scattered across the table. He had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, power, influence, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was missing from his life. Lost in thought, Julian didn't notice the small figure that darted past the conference room door, a flash of movement in the corner of his eye. If he had, he might have recognized the determined set of Lily's jaw, the fierce light in her eyes that mirrored his own long-forgotten idealism. As the elevator doors closed behind the investors, Julian stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city he had conquered. Far below, hidden in the shadows of his tower, a little girl was about to change the course of his life forever. But for now, unaware of the impending collision of their worlds, Julian Cartwright remained alone at the top of his ivory tower, a king without a kingdom, a man who had everything and nothing all at once. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she slipped through the revolving door of Cartwright Tower, the warmth of the lobby washing over her like a comforting embrace. For a moment she stood frozen, overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. The polished marble floors gleamed beneath her worn sneakers, and the soft glow of crystal chandeliers illuminated the bustling space. Shaking off her awe, Lily quickly darted behind a large potted plant, her eyes darting nervously around the lobby. Security guards stood at attention near the elevators, their watchful gazes sweeping across the room. She knew she had to be careful. One wrong move, and she'd be tossed back onto the cold streets. Taking a deep breath, Lily surveyed the scene before her. Businessmen and women hurried across the lobby, their designer shoes clicking against the marble floor. Some chatted animatedly on cell phones, while others huddled in small groups, discussing matters that seemed of great importance. As she watched, Lily noticed a pattern in the flow of people. Every few minutes, a group would approach the security desk, show their badges, and be waved through to the elevators. If she could just find a way to blend in with one of these groups, she might be able to make it past the guards. Lily's gaze fell on a young woman struggling with an armful of coffee cups and pastry boxes. An idea began to form in her mind. Gathering her courage, Lily emerged from her hiding spot and approached the woman. "Excuse me, miss," Lily said, her voice small but determined. "It looks like you could use some help. I'd be happy to carry something for you." The woman looked down at Lily, surprise evident on her face. For a moment, Lily feared she would be shooed away, but then the woman's expression softened. "That's very kind of you," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude. "Here, can you take this box of pastries? Be careful, it's a bit heavy." Lily nodded eagerly, taking the box in her arms. It was indeed heavy, but the weight was nothing compared to the burden of worry she carried for her mother. Together, they approached the security desk. "Good afternoon, Ms. Thompson," one of the guards said, nodding to the woman. His eyes flicked briefly to Lily, but he seemed to assume she was with Ms. Thompson. "Afternoon, Frank," Ms. Thompson replied with a smile. "Just bringing up some treats for the team. We're pulling an all-nighter for the big presentation tomorrow." The guard nodded sympathetically and waved them through. Lily's heart leapt as they passed the security checkpoint and entered the elevator. She had done it. She was in. As the elevator began its ascent, Lily's mind raced. She hadn't thought beyond getting into the building. What would she do now? How could she find help for her mother in this towering maze of offices? The elevator dinged, and Miss Thompson stepped out onto a bustling floor. "This is me," she said, turning to Lily. "Thank you so much for your help. You can just set the box down here." Lily nodded, carefully placing the box on a nearby desk. As Ms. Thompson turned away, distracted by a colleague calling her name, Lily seized her opportunity. Instead of following the woman out of the elevator, she pressed herself into the corner, making herself as small and inconspicuous as possible. The doors closed, and Lily found herself alone in the elevator, rising higher and higher into the heart of Cartwright Tower. She watched the floor numbers tick by, 20, 30, 40. With each passing floor, her anxiety grew. What would she find at the top? Would there be someone who could help her and her mother? Finally, the elevator slowed to a stop on the 52nd floor. The doors slid open silently, revealing a hushed and elegant hallway. Lily stepped out cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in her surroundings. The plush carpet muffled her footsteps as she crept down the corridor, passing closed doors with important-sounding nameplates. As she rounded a corner, Lily heard voices coming from behind a partially open door. Curiosity got the better of her, and she inched closer, peering through the crack. Inside, she saw a group of men in expensive suits gathered around a large table. At the head of the table sat a man with salt and pepper hair, his commanding presence drawing all eyes to him. This must be Julian Cartwright, Lily realized, the man whose name adorned the building. "Gentlemen," Cartwright was saying, his voice smooth and confident, "I believe we're on the verge of a historic agreement. This deal will not only revolutionize the energy sector in Asia, but will also set a new standard for sustainable development worldwide." Lily listened intently, trying to make sense of the complex words and phrases being tossed around. Though much of it was beyond her understanding, she caught snippets that made her blood run cold. High-risk investments, leveraging assets, aggressive expansion. The words echoed in her mind, stirring memories of hushed conversations between her parents, of her father's excitement over a sure-thing investment that promised to secure their future. Memories of the day it all came crashing down, leaving them with nothing. As she watched the men in the room nod and smile, seemingly oblivious to the potential consequences of their actions, something snapped inside Lily. She thought of her mother, sick and alone in their makeshift shelter. She thought of the countless others she'd met on the streets, all victims of broken promises and shattered dreams. Before she could second-guess herself, Lily pushed the door open wide, her small frame silhouetted in the doorway. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to stare at the unexpected intruder. "Don't sign anything," Lily cried, her voice trembling but filled with conviction. "You don't know what you're doing. You'll hurt people. People like my family." For a moment, the room was frozen in shocked silence. Then, chaos erupted. Security guards rushed forward, and executives leapt to their feet, shouting in confusion and anger. But Lily stood her ground, her eyes locked with Julian Cartwright's stunned gaze. In that moment, two worlds collided, the glittering realm of high finance and the harsh reality of life on the streets. And in the eyes of a little girl, Julian Cartwright saw a reflection of a truth he had long forgotten. The conference room erupted into chaos. Security guards rushed towards Lily, their faces a mix of confusion and determination. The Chinese investors leapt to their feet, shouting in a blend of Mandarin and English, while Julian Cartwright's executives scrambled to regain control of the situation. But amid the pandemonium, Julian remained seated, his eyes fixed on the small figure standing defiantly in the doorway. There was something in the girl's gaze, a mix of fear, desperation, and unwavering conviction that cut through the noise and chaos, reaching a part of him he thought had long since been buried. "Stop!" Julian's voice boomed across the room, silencing the commotion instantly. All eyes turned to him as he slowly rose from his chair, his expression unreadable. "Everyone, please calm down. Let's handle this situation with some dignity." He turned to the security guards who had almost reached Lily. "Gentlemen, please escort our unexpected guest to my office." "Gently," he added, his tone leaving no room for argument. As the guards led a bewildered Lily away, Julian addressed the still agitated investors. "My sincerest apologies for this interruption, gentlemen. Please give me a moment to address this matter, and then we'll resume our discussion. David," he nodded to his assistant, who looked on the verge of fainting, "see to our guest's comfort." With that, Julian strode out of the conference room, leaving a wake of whispers and speculative glances behind him. As he walked towards his office, his mind raced. Who was this girl? How had she managed to infiltrate one of the most secure buildings in the city? And more importantly, why did her words resonate so deeply within him? Julian entered his office to find Lily perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her small frame dwarfed by the massive piece of furniture. The security guards stood at attention nearby, uncertainty clear on their faces. "Leave us," Julian said to the guards, his tone brooking no argument. As the door closed behind them, he turned his attention to Lily. Up close, He could see the toll that life on the streets had taken on her, the worn clothes, the haunted look in her eyes, the way she held herself as if expecting a blow at any moment. "Well, young lady," Julian began, keeping his voice calm and even, "you've certainly made quite an entrance. May I ask your name?" Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Finally, she met Julian's gaze. "Lily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily Carter." Julian nodded, settling into the chair across from her. "All right, Lily Carter. I think you owe me an explanation. How did you get into this building, and why did you feel the need to interrupt a very important business meeting?" Lily took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a fierce determination that caught Julian off guard. "I got in because I had to," she said, her voice growing stronger. "My mum is sick, and we have nowhere to go. I thought maybe if I could find someone important, someone who could help her." Her voice trailed off, and Julian felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. He pushed it aside, focusing on the matter at hand. "That doesn't explain why you burst into my meeting shouting about not signing contracts." Lily's eyes flashed. "Because I heard what you were saying. It sounded just like the men who tricked my dad. They promised him everything would be okay if he just invested a little more, took a few more risks. But it wasn't okay. We lost everything. And now—" She broke off, fighting back tears. Julian found himself at a loss for words, an unusual state for a man accustomed to always being in control. "I see," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Lily, I understand you've been through a lot, but you have to realize that business is complex. The deals we make, the risks we take, they're not meant to hurt people." Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. "But they do hurt people, Mr. Cartwright. Maybe you don't mean to, but they do. My dad, he believed in the promise of a better future, just like the men in your meeting. But when it all fell apart, there was no one there to help us pick up the pieces." Julian felt a chill run down his spine. The girl's words echoed thoughts he had pushed aside for years. Doubts about the true impact of his business dealings, questions about the human cost of his relentless pursuit of success. For a moment, the mask of the ruthless businessman slipped, and Lily caught a glimpse of the man beneath. A man grappling with the consequences of his actions. A man who had perhaps lost sight of why he had entered the world of business in the first place. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Julian cleared his throat. "Lily, I appreciate your honesty. It's been a long time since anyone has spoken to me with such frankness." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I can't promise you anything right now, but I give you my word that I will look into the concerns you've raised. In the meantime," he reached for a notepad on his desk, scribbling something quickly, "I want you to take this to the lobby. It's an authorization for a hotel room for you and your mother, just for tonight. We can discuss this further tomorrow when we've both had some rest." Lily took the paper hesitantly, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're not going to call the police?" Julian shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "No, Lily, I'm not. But I do expect you to be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. We have a lot to talk about." As Lily stood to leave, Julian felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Part of him wanted to dismiss the entire incident, to return to the familiar world of deals and negotiations. But another part, a part he had long ignored, felt awakened by this unexpected encounter. Watching the small figure of Lily Carter walk out of his office, Julian Cartwright realized that his life, and the lives of many others, were about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. The echoes of truth spoken by a child had shaken the foundations of his carefully constructed world, and there would be no going back. As the door closed behind Lily, Julian turned to the window. Looking out over the city he thought he knew so well. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of something he had almost forgotten, hope, mixed with the unsettling realization that perhaps, just perhaps, he had lost sight of what truly mattered in his relentless pursuit of success. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Cartwright's penthouse apartment, but he hardly noticed the spectacular view of the New York skyline. He sat at his kitchen island, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him, his mind replaying the events of the previous evening. The face of Lily Carter, with her piercing blue eyes and determined set of her jaw, haunted him. Her words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he had built his life upon. For the first time in years, Julian found himself questioning the very foundations of his success. With a heavy sigh, he reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "David," he said when his assistant answered, "I need you to clear my schedule for the morning, and I need you to do some research. Find out everything you can about the investment scams that have been targeting middle-class families in the city over the past year." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir?" David's voice was hesitant, confused by this unexpected request. "Just do it, David," Julian said, his tone softer than usual. "And one more thing, when Lily Carter arrives, bring her directly to my office. No security escort this time." As he ended the call, Julian's gaze fell on a framed photo on his kitchen counter. It showed a much younger version of himself, standing proudly in front of a small storefront. Cartwright Electronics read the simple sign above the door. He remembered that day vividly. The excitement, the hope, the genuine desire to create something that would improve people's lives. When had that changed? When had the pursuit of profit overshadowed everything else? The sound of his phone ringing jolted Julian from his reverie. It was Mr. Zhang, the lead investor from the interrupted meeting. Julian took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. "Mr. Zhang," he answered, his voice calm and professional. "I owe you an apology for last night's disruption." "Mr. Cartwright," Zhang's voice was cold. "We came to New York in good faith, expecting to finalize a deal with a man known for his unwavering resolve. Instead, we witnessed a security breach and saw you swayed by the words of a street urchin. I must say we're reconsidering our position." Julian felt a flicker of his old self, the part of him that would do anything to close a deal, to expand his empire. But then Lily's words flashed through his mind again. "Mr. Zhang," he said carefully, "I understand your concerns, but I've come to realize that there are factors we need to consider more carefully. I propose we postpone our final decision for a week. I want to ensure that our venture truly benefits all parties involved, including the communities we aim to serve." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Zhang spoke again, his voice held a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "Very well, Mr. Cartwright, 1 week. But be aware we will be exploring other options in the meantime." As the call ended, Julian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He knew he was taking an enormous risk, potentially jeopardizing a deal worth millions. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond mere profit. Across the city, in a modest hotel room provided by Cartwright Industries, Lily Carter sat on the edge of a bed, watching her mother sleep peacefully. The events of the previous night felt like a dream. The opulent tower, the tense confrontation, and the unexpected kindness of Julian Cartwright. Sarah Carter stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Lily?" she murmured, her voice hoarse but stronger than it had been in weeks. "Where are we? What happened?" Lily took her mother's hand, feeling the warmth returning to her skin. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly. I found someone who might be able to help us. We're safe for now." As Lily recounted the events of the previous night, carefully omitting the more frightening details, she saw a range of emotions flicker across her mother's face. Disbelief, hope, and a touch of fear. "Oh, Lily," Sarah sighed, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You're so brave, but we can't put our trust in strangers, especially not powerful businessmen. They're the ones who—" She trailed off, pain clouding her eyes. "I know, Mom," Lily said, her voice firm, "but Mr. Cartwright is different. I saw it in his eyes. He listened to me, really listened. I think he wants to help." Sarah looked at her daughter, marveling at the strength and wisdom she saw there. When had her little girl grown up so much? "All right," she said finally. "We'll go see him together. But promise me you'll be careful, Lily. The world isn't always kind to people like us." As Lily nodded, a knock at the door made them both jump. A hotel employee stood there, holding a garment bag. "Compliments of Mr. Cartwright," he said, handing the bag to a stunned Lily. Inside they found 2 sets of new clothes, simple but well-made and warm. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the soft fabric. It had been so long since they'd had anything new. As they dressed, Lily felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. In a few short hours, she would be face to face with Julian Cartwright again. This time she wouldn't be an intruder, but an invited guest. She only hoped that the man she'd glimpsed beneath the polished exterior, the man who had shown a flicker of compassion and understanding, would be the one to greet them. Little did Lily know that across the city, Julian Cartwright was grappling with his own doubts and hopes, preparing for a meeting that would challenge everything he thought he knew about business, success, and the true meaning of wealth. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city streets, two very different worlds were about to collide once again, and the ripples of that collision would spread far beyond the walls of Cartwright Tower, touching lives in ways that neither Lily nor Julian could yet imagine. The elevator doors slid open on the 52nd floor of Cartwright Tower, revealing a nervous Lily and her mother, Sarah. They stepped out hesitantly, their new clothes a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. David, Julian's assistant, greeted them with a polite smile, though Lily could see the curiosity in his eyes. "Mr. Cartwright is expecting you," David said, leading them down the hallway. "He's asked not to be disturbed during your meeting, so please, take all the time you need." As they approached Julian's office, Lily felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. She looked up to see fear and uncertainty etched on Sarah's face. "It's okay, Mom," Lily whispered, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Remember what I told you. He listened to me. He wants to help." The door opened, and Julian Cartwright stood before them. Gone was the intimidating figure from the night before, replaced by a man who looked different. His suit was as impeccable as ever, but there was a softness in his eyes that Lily hadn't noticed before. "Lily, Mrs. Carter," Julian greeted them, his voice warm. "Please come in. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Tea?" Sarah shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Lily, however, straightened her shoulders and met Julian's gaze. "No, thank you, Mr. Cartwright. We're here because you said you wanted to talk." A small smile tugged at Julian's lips. "Direct as ever, I see. Yes, Lily, we do need to talk. Please, have a seat." As they settled into the plush chairs across from Julian's desk, an awkward silence fell over the room. It was Sarah who finally broke it, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Cartwright, I want to apologize for my daughter's behavior last night. She shouldn't have—" "No, Mrs. Carter," Julian interrupted gently. "Your daughter did nothing wrong. In fact, I owe her a debt of gratitude." Surprise flashed across Sarah's face, and Lily leaned forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. Julian took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Lily's intervention last night made me realize something important. I've spent years building this company, focusing on profits and expansion, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the people we're supposed to be serving." He turned to Lily, his expression serious. "You asked me not to sign that contract. You were right to be concerned. After you left, I did some research. The investment group we were meeting with has been linked to several scandals in Asia, predatory practices that have hurt countless families." Lily felt a surge of vindication, quickly followed by a pang of sadness. How many other families had suffered like hers? "So what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Julian leaned back in his chair, a determined look in his eyes. "I'm going to change things, starting with how we do business. No more deals that prioritize profit over people. No more turning a blind eye to the consequences of our actions." He paused, his gaze moving between Lily and Sarah. "But I need your help, both of you. Lily, your perspective, your honesty is something I've been missing. And Mrs. Carter, I'd like to offer you a job." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "A job? But I don't have any experience in—" "You have the most valuable experience of all," Julian interrupted. "You've lived through the consequences of unethical business practices. I want to create a new division within Cartwright Industries, focused on community outreach and ethical investment. I want you to lead it." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Mr. Cartwright, I don't know what to say. It's too much." Julian held up a hand. "Please, call me Julian. And it's not too much. It's a start. A way for me to make amends for the harm I may have inadvertently caused over the years." Lily looked between her mother and Julian, a mix of emotions swirling within her. Hope, excitement, and a touch of wariness. "What about the people who hurt us?" she asked. "The ones who took everything from us?" Julian's expression hardened slightly. "I'm looking into that, Lily. I promise you, If there's a way to bring them to justice and help other families who've been affected, we'll find it. As the conversation continued, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The initial tension melted away, replaced by a cautious optimism. Sarah began to open up, sharing her experiences and ideas. Lily watched in amazement as her mother's confidence grew, her eyes lighting up with a spark that had been missing for far too long. Julian listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. Lily could see the wheels turning in his mind, plans forming and evolving as he absorbed their stories. As the meeting drew to a close, Julian stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. "You know," he said softly, "I built this tower thinking it would be my legacy, but now I realize true legacy isn't about buildings or money. It's about the lives we touch, the positive changes we make in the world." He turned back to Lily and Sarah, a new sense of purpose evident in his bearing. "This is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but together I believe we can make a real difference." As Lily and her mother left the office, escorted by a beaming David who had instructions to help them find a permanent place to live, Lily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly hope. Back in his office, Julian Cartwright sat at his desk, staring at the framed photo of his younger self. With a determined nod, he reached for his phone. "David," he said, when his assistant answered, "cancel my appointments for the rest of the week, and get me everything we have on ethical business practices and community-focused initiatives. It's time for Cartwright Industries to change course." As he hung up, Julian felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead would be challenging, fraught with obstacles and resistance from those who benefited from the old way of doing things. But with Lily's honesty, Sarah's experience, and his own resources and determination, Julian knew they had a fighting chance to create something truly meaningful. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the New York skyline. In Cartwright Tower, a most unlikely alliance had been forged: a powerful businessman, a struggling single mother, and a brave little girl. Together, they stood at the precipice of change, ready to take on the world and prove that compassion and ethics could coexist with success in the cutthroat world of business. As night fell over the city, a new chapter was beginning, not just for Lily, Sarah, and Julian, but for countless others whose lives would be touched by the ripples of change emanating from this unexpected meeting of worlds. The news spread through Cartwright Tower like wildfire. Julian Cartwright, the ruthless tycoon known for his cutthroat business tactics, was changing course. Whispers filled the hallways, a mix of excitement, skepticism, and fear. For many, the status quo had been comfortable, predictable. Change, especially one as dramatic as this, was terrifying. Julian sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by his top executives. The tension in the room was palpable. He had just finished outlining his new vision for Cartwright Industries, and the reactions ranged from cautious optimism to outright hostility. "With all due respect, Mr. Cartwright," spoke up Gerald Thompson, the CFO, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "this ethical business approach sounds noble, but it's not practical. Our shareholders expect growth, not charity." Julian leaned forward, his gaze steady. "And they'll get growth, Gerald, but sustainable growth. Growth that doesn't come at the expense of vulnerable communities or the environment." "But the deals we have in the pipeline," interjected another executive, her voice tinged with panic. "The Asian expansion, the tech acquisitions, we can't just abandon them." "We're not abandoning anything," Julian replied calmly. "We're re-evaluating. Every deal, every partnership will be scrutinized through this new lens. Those that align with our new ethos will proceed. Those that don't will be restructured or, if necessary, terminated." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Julian could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear of the unknown. He couldn't blame them. Just a week ago, he would have reacted the same way. "I know this is a big change," he continued, his voice softening slightly. "But I truly believe this is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The world is changing. Consumers, investors, they're demanding more from corporations. We have a chance to be at the forefront of this change, to set an example for the entire industry." As the meeting continued, Julian outlined his plans: a new division focused on community outreach and ethical investment, stricter environmental standards for all their projects, and a commitment to transparency in all their dealings. Some executives nodded along, cautiously optimistic. Others sat stone-faced, already plotting their exits. Julian knew he was taking a risk, potentially alienating some of his most experienced staff. But as he thought of Lily and Sarah, of the countless others like them affected by ruthless business practices, he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. Across town, in a modest but comfortable apartment provided by Cartwright Industries, Lily watched her mother prepare for her first day at work. Sarah stood before the mirror, adjusting her new blazer, a mix of excitement and nervousness on her face. "You look great, Mom," Lily said, smiling. It had been so long since she'd seen her mother like this, confident, purposeful. Sarah turned, kneeling down to meet Lily's eyes. "Are you sure you're okay with this, sweetheart? It's a big change for both of us." Lily nodded firmly. "I'm sure. You're going to help people, Mom, like Mr. Cartwright helped us." As Sarah left for work, Lily couldn't help but feel a twinge of worry. The past week had been like a dream, a safe place to live, good food, and the promise of a better future. But a small part of her, the part that had learned to be wary after months on the streets, wondered how long it would last. Back at Cartwright Tower, Sarah arrived for her first day, her heart pounding as she stepped into the elevator. The opulence still overwhelmed her, but she steeled herself, remembering Julian's words. Her experience, her perspective, was valuable. As she exited on the 48th floor, home to the new Community Outreach and Ethical Investment Division, she was greeted by a young woman with a warm smile. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Emily, Mr. Cartwright's assistant. He asked me to show you around and help you get settled." Sarah followed Emily through the office, taking in the bustling atmosphere. People hurried about, carrying stacks of papers and engaged in intense discussions. It was a far cry from anything she had experienced before, but there was an energy, a sense of purpose that was infectious. Emily led her to a corner office with a breathtaking view of the city. "This is you," she said, gesturing to the nameplate on the door that read, "Sarah Carter, Director of Community Outreach." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was real. This was really happening. As she settled into her new role, Sarah found herself drawing on strengths she didn't know she had. Her experiences, the struggles, the setbacks, the hard-won victories, gave her a unique perspective that her colleagues valued. She spoke the language of those they were trying to help, understood their fears and hopes in a way that many in the corporate world couldn't. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, changes began to take shape. Julian, true to his word, scrutinized every aspect of Cartwright Industries' operations. Deals were renegotiated, partnerships re-evaluated. It wasn't easy. There was pushback from investors, grumbling from long-time employees resistant to change. But there were victories too. A low-income housing project that had been stalled for years due to bureaucratic red tape suddenly found itself with a powerful ally in Cartwright Industries. An innovative clean energy startup, previously overlooked by investors, received crucial funding and support. As Julian worked late into the night, poring over reports and proposals, he often found his thoughts drifting to Lily. Her courage, her unwavering sense of right and wrong had sparked this transformation. He made a mental note to check in on her, to ensure that amidst all the corporate maneuvering, he didn't lose sight of the individuals at the heart of this change. Little did Julian know that across the city, Lily was facing challenges of her own. As she adjusted to her new school, trying to catch up on months of missed education, she found herself caught between two worlds: the harsh realities she had known on the streets and the privileged lives of her new classmates. The winds of change were blowing through the lives of Julian, Sarah, and Lily, bringing with them new opportunities and unforeseen challenges. As the sun set on another day of transformation at Cartwright Industries, the true test of their resolve was just beginning. The shrill ring of the school bell cut through the air, signaling the end of another day. Lily Carter gathered her books, her movements deliberate and careful. She was still getting used to the weight of a full backpack, to the routine of classes and homework after months of survival on the streets. As she made her way through the crowded hallways of Preston Academy, a prestigious private school where Julian had insisted on enrolling her, Lily couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The other students moved in tight-knit groups, their laughter and chatter creating a wall of sound that Lily felt she could never penetrate. "Hey, street girl!" a mocking voice called out. Lily flinched, recognizing the voice of Brittany, one of her classmates. "Did you actually bring lunch today, or are you going to dig through the trash again?" Lily's cheeks burned with shame and anger. She had made the mistake of mentioning her past during a class discussion on social inequality, and some of her classmates had latched onto it, using her background as ammunition for their taunts. "Leave her alone, Brit," another voice cut in. Lily turned to see Max, a quiet boy from her math class, stepping between her and Brittany. "Don't you have anything better to do?" Brittany rolled her eyes but moved on, her posse following close behind. Max turned to Lily, concern in his eyes. "You okay?" Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Max gave her a small smile before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Lily to navigate the rest of her journey alone. As she stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, Lily spotted her mother waiting by the school gates. Sarah's face lit up as she saw her daughter, but her smile faltered when she noticed Lily's downcast expression. "Rough day?" Sarah asked gently as they began their walk home. Lily shrugged, kicking at a pebble on the sidewalk. "It's fine, just different." Sarah's heart ached for her daughter. The past month had been a whirlwind of change for both of them. While Sarah was thriving in her new role at Cartwright Industries, she knew Lily was struggling to find her place in this new world. "You know," Sarah began carefully, "it's okay to talk about it. What you're feeling, what you're going through, it's a lot of change." Lily was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't fit in, Mom, everyone there. They've never known what it's like to be hungry, to be scared all the time. They look at me like I'm from another planet." Sarah stopped walking, kneeling down to meet Lily's eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But remember, your experiences, everything we've been through, it's made you strong, compassionate. Those are qualities to be proud of." Lily nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. As they resumed their walk, Sarah made a mental note to speak with Julian about the situation. Perhaps there was more they could do to ease Lily's transition. Across town, in the upper echelons of Cartwright Tower, Julian was facing challenges of his own. He sat in his office, engaged in a heated phone conversation with Mr. Zhang, the Chinese investor whose deal he had put on hold. "Mr. Cartwright," Zhang's voice crackled through the speaker, "I must say I'm disappointed. We had such high hopes for our partnership." Julian pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting off a growing headache. "Mr. Zhang, I understand your frustration, but as I explained, we're implementing new ethical guidelines for all our international ventures. The original terms of our deal simply don't align with these new standards." "Standards?" Zhang scoffed. "Since when did Cartwright Industries become so idealistic? The Julian Cartwright I knew wouldn't let sentimentality interfere with good business." Julian felt a flare of anger at Zhang's words, but he tamped it down. "This isn't about sentimentality, Mr. Zhang. It's about sustainable, responsible growth. I believe we can still work together, but it will require some significant changes to our original agreement." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Zhang spoke, his voice cold. "Very well, Mr. Cartwright. Send over your new proposals, but be aware you're not the only player in this game. There are others who would be more than happy to partner with us under the original terms." As the call ended, Julian leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. The past month had been a constant battle, renegotiating deals, placating worried shareholders, trying to shift the entire culture of a massive corporation. There were days when he questioned whether he was doing the right thing, whether one company could really make a difference in the face of entrenched corporate greed. But then he would think of Lily, of the fierce determination in her eyes when she had burst into his meeting that fateful night. He thought of Sarah working tirelessly in her new role, bringing a perspective to the corporate world that it desperately needed. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. David, his assistant, entered, a worried expression on his face. "Sir, the board is asking for an emergency meeting. They're concerned about the recent changes and the impact on our stock prices." Julian nodded, unsurprised. He had been expecting this confrontation. "Schedule it for tomorrow morning, David. And could you ask Sarah Carter to join us?" "I think it's time the board heard directly from our new community outreach director." As David left to make the arrangements, Julian turned to the window, looking out over the city he had once viewed solely as a market to be conquered. Now, he saw the human stories behind every building, every street corner. He saw Lily and Sarah, and countless others like them struggling to find their place in a world that often seemed stacked against them. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges both personal and professional. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Julian felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had set in motion a change that went beyond balance sheets and profit margins. It was a change that had the potential to transform lives, to redefine what success truly meant in the corporate world. With determination in his heart, Julian began to prepare for the battles that lay ahead. The road to change was never easy, but with Lily's courage, Sarah's wisdom, and his own resources and influence, he believed they had a fighting chance to make a real difference. As night fell over New York City, three unlikely allies, a corporate tycoon, a formerly homeless mother, and a brave little girl, stood at the threshold of a new chapter. Their journey was far from over, but together they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their vision of a more just and compassionate world. The morning sun had barely peeked over the New York skyline when Julian Cartwright strode into the conference room on the top floor of Cartwright Tower. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Around the long mahogany table sat the members of the board of directors, their faces a mix of concern, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. Julian took his seat at the head of the table, with Sarah Carter quietly settling into the chair to his right. He could feel the questioning glances directed at her, the unspoken challenge to her presence in this sanctuary of corporate power. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice steady and confident, "I know many of you have concerns about the recent changes in our company's direction. I've called this meeting to address those concerns head-on and to reaffirm my commitment to the future of Cartwright Industries." Before he could continue, Gerald Thompson, the CFO, interjected. "With all due respect, Julian, your commitment is precisely what we're worried about. Our stock has dropped 15% since you announced this new ethical direction. Shareholders are panicking, and we've lost 2 major deals in the past month alone." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Julian had expected this, but the reality of facing down his own board was more daunting than he had anticipated. He took a deep breath, ready to defend his vision, when Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "If I may," she said, her voice quiet but firm. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others dismissive. "I understand your concerns. Change is always scary, especially when it affects the bottom line, but I'd like to share some numbers with you that might provide a different perspective." Sarah stood, moving to the screen at the end of the room. With a few taps on her tablet, she brought up a series of graphs and charts. "These are the results of our first community outreach initiatives," she explained. "In just 1 month, we've provided support to over 500 families at risk of homelessness. We've funded 3 clean energy startups that show immense promise, and our employee satisfaction scores have increased by 22%. She paused, letting the information sink in. "But here's the most interesting part," she continued, bringing up a new set of data. "Customer sentiment towards Cartwright Industries has improved dramatically. We're seeing a 30% increase in positive social media mentions, and several major ethical investment funds have expressed interest in increasing their stakes in our company." The room was silent as the board members absorbed this information. Julian felt a surge of pride watching Sarah command the room with her quiet confidence and irrefutable data. "What Sarah is demonstrating," Julian added, standing to join her, "is that ethical business practices aren't just morally right, they're economically smart. Yes, we're facing some short-term challenges, but we're positioning ourselves to be leaders in a changing global economy where consumers and investors alike are demanding corporate responsibility." For the next 2 hours, Julian and Sarah fielded questions, addressed concerns, and outlined their vision for the future of Cartwright Industries. It was a grueling session, with passionate arguments on both sides. But as the meeting drew to a close, Julian could sense a shift in the room. The outright hostility had faded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. "We're not asking you to blindly accept this new direction," Julian said in his closing remarks. "We're asking you to give it a chance, to see the potential for growth and positive change that we see. Cartwright Industries has always been at the forefront of innovation. Let's be innovators, not just in technology, but in how we conduct business itself." As the board members filed out of the room, many paused to shake Sarah's hand or ask her follow-up questions. Julian caught snippets of conversation. Interesting approach. Potential for new markets. Worth exploring further. When the last board member had left, Julian turned to Sarah with a wide smile. "You were amazing," he said, the relief evident in his voice. "I think we actually won some of them over." Sarah returned his smile, though her eyes were tired. "It's a start," she agreed, "but we still have a long way to go." As they gathered their materials, Julian's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lily. "How did the meeting go? Did Mom knock their socks off?" Julian chuckled, showing the message to Sarah. "Your daughter has quite the faith in you," he said. Sarah's eyes softened as she read the message. "She's the reason I can do any of this," she said quietly. "Everything I'm fighting for, it's all for her." As they left the conference room, both Julian and Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced their first major hurdle and come out stronger, but, as they would soon learn, the challenges were far from over. The winds of change they had set in motion were about to blow even stronger, testing their resolve in ways they could never have anticipated. The classroom was abuzz with excitement as Ms. Hendricks, the social studies teacher at Preston Academy, announced the topic for their next project. "Class, we're going to be exploring social inequality and its impact on our community. I want each of you to choose an issue that's important to you and create a presentation on how we can address it." Lily sat at her desk, her mind racing. This was a topic she knew all too well, not from textbooks or statistics, but from lived experience. As her classmates chattered around her, debating which trendy cause to champion, Lily felt a familiar mix of frustration and determination building within her. "Lily," Ms. Hendricks' voice cut through her thoughts, "have you decided on your topic?" All eyes turned to her and Lily felt her cheeks grow warm. But then she remembered her mother's words from a few nights ago. "Your experiences have value, Lily. They've given you a perspective that others need to hear." Taking a deep breath, Lily met her teacher's gaze. "Yes, Ms. Hendricks. I want to talk about homelessness and how it affects families and children." A few snickers echoed from the back of the room, but Ms. Hendricks' face lit up with interest. "That's an excellent choice, Lily. I look forward to seeing your presentation." As the bell rang and students began to file out, Lily felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Max, the boy who had stood up for her against Brittany's bullying. "Hey," he said a little awkwardly, "I think your topic is really cool. Do you maybe want to work together? I don't know much about it, but I'd like to learn." Lily blinked in surprise, then felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "Sure," she said, "that would be great." Over the next few weeks, Lily threw herself into the project with a passion that surprised even her. She and Max spent hours at the library, researching statistics and policies. But more than that, Lily shared her own stories, of nights spent in shelters, of the constant fear and uncertainty, of the small acts of kindness that had meant the world to her and her mother. Max listened with wide eyes, his perspective shifting with each story Lily shared. "I had no idea," he said one afternoon, as they worked on their presentation. "I mean, I've seen homeless people on the street, but I never really thought about what their lives were like." Lily nodded, understanding all too well. "Most people don't," she said softly. "That's why it's so important to talk about it." As the day of the presentations approached, Lily felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was her chance to give voice to the experiences of so many who went unheard. She thought of the families she and her mother had met in shelters, of the children who, like her, had to grow up too fast. The morning of the presentation dawned bright and clear. Lily arrived at school early, her heart pounding as she set up her materials. She had asked her mother and Julian to attend, and she spotted them slipping into the back of the classroom, just as Ms. Hendricks called the class to order. As her classmates gave their presentations on various social issues, some more passionate than others, Lily felt her nervousness growing. But when Ms. Hendricks called her name, she stood tall, drawing strength from the encouraging smiles of her mother and Julian. "Homelessness isn't just about not having a roof over your head," Lily began, her voice clear and strong. "It's about losing your sense of safety, your dignity, your hope for the future." As she spoke, sharing statistics interwoven with personal anecdotes, Lily could see the impact her words were having. Her classmates, usually fidgety and distracted, were hanging on her every word. Even Brittany, her frequent tormentor, looked shocked and a little ashamed. "But there is hope," Lily continued, her voice gaining confidence. With the right support and resources, families can rebuild their lives. I know because my mom and I did it. And now we're working to help others do the same. She went on to outline the initiatives that Cartwright Industries was implementing, explaining how corporate responsibility could make a real difference in addressing social issues. As Lily concluded her presentation, the classroom erupted in applause. Ms. Hendricks had tears in her eyes as she thanked Lily, praising her bravery and insight. In the back of the room, Sarah and Julian exchanged proud glances. They had known Lily was special, but seeing her command the room, speaking with such passion and conviction, was truly awe-inspiring. As the class was dismissed, Lily found herself surrounded by classmates asking questions, offering support, and in some cases apologizing for their past behavior. Max stood by her side, beaming with pride at their joint effort. Later that evening, as Lily recounted the day's events over dinner with her mother and Julian, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I think," she said slowly, "I finally understand why everything happened the way it did. Why we had to go through all that hardship." Sarah reached out, squeezing her daughter's hand. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lily's eyes shone with a wisdom beyond her years. "If we hadn't gone through it, we wouldn't be able to help others now. We wouldn't understand what they're going through." She turned to Julian. "And you wouldn't have changed your company to help people." Julian nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "You're right, Lily. You've taught us all so much. You've changed not just your own life, but the lives of so many others." As the conversation continued, filled with laughter and plans for the future, Lily felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She had found her voice, and with it, the power to make a real difference in the world. Outside, the New York City skyline glittered against the night sky, a testament to human ambition and resilience. And in a cozy apartment, three unlikely allies, a corporate tycoon, a former homeless mother, and a brave little girl, continued to forge a path toward a more compassionate and just world. One story, one initiative, one changed mind at a time. The New York business world was abuzz with speculation. Rumors of Cartwright Industries' radical new direction had spread like wildfire, and everyone from Wall Street analysts to Silicon Valley tech gurus was weighing in. Some praised Julian's bold move towards ethical business practices, hailing it as the future of corporate responsibility. Others scoffed, predicting the downfall of what had once been one of the most ruthlessly successful companies in the country. Julian Cartwright sat in his office, scanning the latest news articles on his tablet. The headlines ranged from Cartwright's folly, how one CEO's misguided idealism could topple an empire, to a new era of corporate ethics. Cartwright Industries leads the way. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, but he remained convinced that they were on the right path. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. Sarah entered, a stack of papers in her arms and a determined look on her face. "Julian, we've got a situation," she said without preamble. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you too, Sarah. What's going on?" Sarah spread the papers across his desk. "Remember that low-income housing project we took on last month? The one that had been stalled for years?" Julian nodded and she continued. "Well, it turns out the reason it was stalled wasn't just bureaucratic red tape. There are some powerful people who don't want it built." Julian leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" "I've been digging into the history of the project," Sarah explained, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "There's a group of real estate developers who've been trying to buy up that land for years. They want to build luxury condos. They've been using their political connections to block the housing project." Julian's jaw clenched. This was exactly the kind of corporate maneuvering he had engaged in himself not so long ago. The realization made him feel slightly nauseated. "Do we have proof?" he asked. Sarah nodded, pointing to several documents. "It's all here. Backroom deals, campaign contributions to key city officials, even some thinly veiled threats to community organizers who supported the project." Julian stood, pacing behind his desk as he processed this information. "If we expose this, we're going to make some very powerful enemies," he said slowly. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. "I know, but isn't that exactly why we're doing this? To stand up to this kind of corruption?" Julian couldn't help but smile. Just a few months ago, Sarah had been struggling to survive on the streets. Now here she was, fearlessly taking on corporate giants. "You're right," he said. "Let's do it. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just go public with accusations. We need a strategy." As they began to plan their next moves, Julian couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. The company he had built on cutthroat tactics and relentless ambition was transforming into a force for good in the world. It wasn't an easy path, but looking at Sarah's determined face, he knew it was the right one. Across town at Preston Academy, Lily was experiencing her own form of transformation. Word of her powerful presentation on homelessness had spread throughout the school, and she found herself becoming something of a minor celebrity. Students who had once ignored or teased her now approached her in the hallways, asking questions about her experiences and how they could help. During lunch, Lily sat with Max and a growing group of friends. They were discussing plans for a school-wide fundraiser to support a local homeless shelter. "I still can't believe Ms. Hendricks wants us to present our idea to the whole school," Max said, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. Lily nodded, understanding his feelings all too well. "It's a big deal," she agreed. "But think about how much good we could do if the whole school gets involved." As they continued to plan, Brittany approached their table. The girl who had once been Lily's primary tormentor now looked uncharacteristically uncertain. Lily," Brittany said hesitantly, "can I talk to you for a second?" Lily exchanged a glance with Max before nodding. "Sure," she said, following Brittany to a quiet corner of the cafeteria. Brittany took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for how I treated you before. I didn't understand. And after your presentation, I talked to my parents about it. We're going to volunteer at a shelter this weekend." Lily was stunned. Of all the changes she had experienced in recent months, this was perhaps the most unexpected. That's great, Brittany," she managed to say. Brittany nodded, a small smile on her face. "I was wondering if maybe you'd want to come with us. Show us the ropes." As Lily agreed, feeling a warmth spreading through her chest, she realized that change wasn't just happening in the boardrooms of Cartwright Tower. It was happening here, in the hallways of her school, in the hearts and minds of her classmates. That evening, as Lily recounted her day to her mother and Julian over dinner, she could see the pride shining in their eyes. Julian said thoughtfully, "what you're doing at your school is just as important as what we're doing at Cartwright Industries. Maybe even more so." Sarah nodded in agreement. "You're changing minds, Lily. You're helping people understand and empathize. That's where real lasting change begins." As they continued their meal, discussing the challenges and victories of their respective days, none of them could have predicted the storm that was brewing on the horizon. The ripple effects of their actions were spreading far and wide, and soon they would face their greatest test yet. But for now, in the warm glow of their shared purpose and growing bond, Julian, Sarah, and Lily felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. They had each other, and they had the power of their convictions. And in the end, they believed that would be enough to weather any storm. The autumn air had a crisp bite to it as Julian Cartwright made his way through the bustling streets of Lower Manhattan. He was headed to a meeting that he both dreaded and knew was necessary. The Blackstone Group, one of the largest private equity firms in the world, had requested a sit-down with him. Julian knew their reputation for aggressive acquisitions and cost-cutting measures. He had a pretty good idea of what they wanted. As he entered the sleek, modern offices of Blackstone, Julian steeled himself for the confrontation ahead. He was shown into a conference room where three men in expensive suits waited for him. At the head of the table sat Richard Blackstone himself, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and unyielding pursuit of profit. "Julian," Blackstone greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Julian sat, his face a mask of calm professionalism. "Richard, gentlemen, what can I do for you today?" Blackstone leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Julian, let's cut to the chase. We've been watching Cartwright Industries closely over the past few months. Your new direction has caught our attention." Julian nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Frankly," Blackstone continued, "we're concerned. Your stock prices have stabilized after the initial drop, but your growth projections are well below industry standards. We believe it's time for a change in leadership." And there it was. Julian had expected this, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. "I see," he said carefully, "and I assume you have a proposal?" One of the other men slid a folder across the table. We're prepared to make a generous offer for a controlling stake in Cartwright Industries. We believe that with some restructuring, we can return the company to its former profitability. Julian opened the folder, scanning the numbers. It was indeed a generous offer. A year ago, he might have been tempted. But now, gentlemen, Julian said, closing the folder, I appreciate your interest, but Cartwright Industries is not for sale. We are committed to our new direction, and we believe it will yield long-term benefits not just for our shareholders, but for the communities we serve. Blackstone's smile disappeared. Julian, be reasonable. Your little experiment in corporate social responsibility is admirable, but it's not sustainable. You're putting the entire company at risk. Julian stood, buttoning his jacket. Thank you for your concern, Richard, but I think we'll take our chances. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. As Julian left the Blackstone offices, he could feel the weight of what had just transpired settling on his shoulders. He had just made some very powerful enemies. But as he thought of Sarah, of Lily, of all the people whose lives were being changed by Cartwright Industries' new initiatives, he knew he had made the right choice. Back at Cartwright Tower, Sarah was facing challenges of her own. She sat in a meeting with representatives from several other corporations who had expressed interest in partnering with Cartwright Industries on community outreach programs. Mrs. Carter, one of the executives, was saying, "While we admire your enthusiasm, we have some concerns about the scope of these programs. The costs involved." Sarah fought the urge to roll her eyes. She had heard this argument countless times over the past few months. "With all due respect," she interjected, "if you look at the data I've provided, you'll see that these programs actually lead to long-term cost savings. Reduced employee turnover, improved community relations, positive brand association. These all translate to tangible financial benefits." The room fell silent as the executives pored over the reports Sarah had prepared. She could see the moment when understanding dawned on their faces. This wasn't just feel-good charity work, it was a new model for sustainable, ethical business practices. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism. Change was happening, slowly but surely. Companies that had once scoffed at the idea of corporate responsibility were now seeking guidance on how to implement similar programs. Meanwhile, at Preston Academy, Lily was preparing for the biggest challenge of her young life. The school-wide assembly where she and Max would present their homeless shelter fundraising initiative was just days away. As she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, practicing her speech, she felt a mix of excitement and terror. "You've got this, Lily," she told her reflection, trying to channel some of her mother's confidence. "You know this topic better than anyone. Just speak from your heart." A soft knock at her door interrupted her practice. "Come in," she called out. Sarah entered, a gentle smile on her face. "How's it going, sweetheart?" Lily sighed, flopping onto her bed. "I'm nervous, Mom. What if I mess up? What if no one cares about what we have to say?" Sarah sat beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Lily, do you remember what you told me about your presentation in class? How it changed Brittany's mind, how it inspired your classmates?" Lily nodded, leaning into her mother's embrace. "That's the power you have," Sarah continued. "Your experiences, your passion, they make people listen, they make people care. Just be yourself up there and you'll do amazing." As Lily hugged her mother, feeling some of her anxiety melt away, neither of them could have known the storm that was brewing. Across the city, in boardrooms and back alleys, forces were aligning against the changes that Cartwright Industries represented. Richard Blackstone sat in his office, a tumbler of expensive scotch in his hand. On his desk lay dossiers on Julian Cartwright, Sarah Carter, and even young Lily. His eyes gleamed with a cold determination as he picked up his phone. "It's time," he said to the person on the other end. "Launch the plan. I want Cartwright Industries dismantled piece by piece." As night fell over New York City, the players in this unfolding drama went about their evening routines, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. Julian reviewed company reports, his mind still on the confrontation with Blackstone. Sarah helped Lily refine her speech, both of them laughing and sharing stories of their day. And in the shadows, unseen forces began to move, setting in motion a chain of events that would test the resolve of Julian, Sarah, and Lily in ways they could never have imagined. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break over them with a fury that threatened to sweep away everything they had worked so hard to build. But for now, in the quiet of the evening, hope still burned bright. In the face of adversity, in the shadow of looming conflict, the unlikely trio at the heart of this story held fast to their convictions, their bond strengthened by shared purpose and unwavering determination. The true test of their resolve was yet to come, but together they stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their vision of a more just and compassionate world. The morning dawned grey and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the storm that was about to break over Cartwright Industries. Julian arrived at his office earlier than usual, a sense of unease gnawing at him. As he stepped off the elevator, he was immediately confronted by a visibly distressed David. "Sir," David said, his voice trembling slightly, "you need to see this." He handed Julian a tablet open to the financial news. The headline made Julian's blood run cold. Cartwright Industries under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Julian's mind raced as he scanned the article. The allegations were baseless, a complete fabrication, but the damage was already being done. The stock was in freefall and social media was ablaze with speculation and accusations. "Get Sarah up here now," Julian barked, striding into his office, "and call an emergency board meeting. We need to get ahead of this." As Julian and his team scrambled to respond to the allegations, across town, Sarah was facing a crisis of her own. She arrived at the community center, where Cartwright Industries had been sponsoring a job training program, only to find the doors locked and a notice of eviction posted. "I don't understand," Sarah said to the center's director, a kind-faced woman named Maria. "We paid the rent for the entire year in advance." Maria shook her head, tears in her eyes. "The landlord says he never received the payments. He's claiming we've been in arrears for months. Mrs. Carter, without this center, so many people will lose their chance at a better life." Sarah felt a mixture of anger and determination rising within her. "We'll figure this out, Maria. I promise you we won't let these people down." As Sarah made her way back to Cartwright Tower, her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Mom, something weird is happening at school. Can you come?" Sarah's heart sank. What now? She redirected her driver to Preston Academy, her mind whirling with possibilities. When she arrived at the school, she found Lily and Max standing outside the auditorium, looks of confusion and disappointment on their faces. "Mom," Lily said as soon as she saw Sarah, "they cancelled our assembly. The principal says there have been complaints from parents about me promoting a political agenda." Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, her heart breaking at the hurt in Lily's eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but listen to me. What you're doing, it's important, it's making a difference. We can't let setbacks like this stop us, okay?" Lily nodded, squaring her shoulders in a way that reminded Sarah so much of herself. "Okay, Mom. What do we do now?" "Now," Sarah said, standing up, "we go back to Cartwright Tower. I have a feeling this is all connected, and we need to figure out what's going on." As they made their way back to the tower, none of them could have imagined the scene that awaited them. The lobby was in chaos, with reporters clamoring for statements and worried employees huddled in groups, whispering anxiously. Sarah ushered Lily through the crowd, using her badge to access the executive elevator. When they reached the top floor, they found Julian in the midst of a heated conference call. "These allegations are completely false," he was saying, his voice firm but strained. "Cartwright Industries has always operated with the highest ethical standards. We will cooperate fully with any investigation, confident that our innocence will be proven." As he ended the call, Julian noticed Sarah and Lily. The look of relief on his face was palpable. "Thank God you're here," he said. "Things are falling apart, and I think I know why." Over the next hour, Julian, Sarah, and even Lily pieced together the events of the day. It quickly became clear that this was no coincidence. They were under attack from multiple fronts. "It has to be Blackstone," Julian said, pacing the length of his office. "He's using his connections to try and discredit us, to force us to sell." Sarah nodded grimly. "The community center, Lily's school assembly, they're not just attacking the company. They're going after everything we stand for." Lily, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "So what do? We can't let them win, right?" Julian and Sarah exchanged a look, both struck by the determination in Lily's voice. In that moment, they realized that this fight was about more than just saving a company. It was about defending a vision of what business could be, about standing up for the vulnerable and marginalized. "No, Lily," Julian said, a fierce resolve in his voice. "We're not going to let them win. But this fight is going to get a lot harder before it gets easier." As the day wore on, Julian, Sarah, and their team worked tirelessly to counter the allegations, to reassure investors and employees, to salvage what they could of their initiatives. But with each passing hour, it became clear that this was only the beginning. In his opulent office across town, Richard Blackstone smiled as he watched the chaos unfold on multiple news channels. He picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Phase 1 is complete," he said to the person on the other end. "Move forward with Phase 2. It's time to turn up the heat on Cartwright and his little do-gooder family." As night fell over New York City, Julian, Sarah, and Lily found themselves huddled in Julian's office, exhausted but unbowed. They had weathered the first strike, but they knew more was coming. The real battle was just beginning. "Whatever happens," Sarah said, looking at Julian and Lily, "we face it together. We've come too far to give up now." Julian nodded, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand. Lily, watching this gesture, felt a warmth in her chest, despite the challenges they faced. They were more than colleagues now, more than friends. They were a family, united in their mission to change the world. As they looked out over the glittering city skyline, each of them silently renewed their commitment to the fight ahead. The storm had broken, but they would not be swept away. They would stand firm, together, against whatever forces sought to tear them down. Little did they know, the true test of their resolve was yet to come. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity at Cartwright Tower. Julian, Sarah, and their team worked around the clock, fighting fires on multiple fronts. The media frenzy showed no signs of abating, with new allegations seeming to surface every hour. Julian stood at the head of the conference table, addressing his key executives and legal team. The strain of the past few days was evident on his face, but his voice was steady and determined. "All right, people, let's recap," he said. "Where do we stand?" The head of legal, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, spoke up first. "We've filed injunctions against the most egregious false reports. Our legal team is working overtime to gather evidence to refute each allegation. But Julian, I have to be honest. Whoever is behind this, they're good. They've crafted these accusations carefully, mixing just enough truth with the lies to make them seem plausible." Julian nodded grimly. "And our stock?" The CFO, looking haggard, shook his head. "It's not good. We're down 30% since this started. Some major investors are threatening to pull out if we don't return to a more traditional business model." The room fell silent, the weight of their situation pressing down on everyone present. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she said, looking around the room. "We're trying to change an entire system, to prove that business can be a force for good. Of course there's pushback, but look at what we've accomplished already." She stood, moving to the screen at the end of the room. With a few taps, she brought up a series of images. The community center, now reopened thanks to their legal team's quick work. Lily and her classmates, who had taken their cancelled assembly online, creating a viral social media campaign about youth homelessness. Employees of Cartwright Industries rallying in support of the company's new direction. "This," Sarah said, gesturing to the screen, "this is what we're fighting for. Real people, real lives changed. We can't give up now." Julian felt a surge of pride and affection as he watched Sarah. She had come so far from the desperate mother he had met just months ago. Her strength, her conviction continued to inspire him. "Sarah's right," Julian said, standing to join her. "We're not backing down, but we need to change our strategy. We've been on the defensive, reacting to each new attack. It's time we took control of the narrative." Over the next few hours, they crafted a plan. They would go public with everything, full transparency about their new initiatives, the challenges they faced, and yes, even the mistakes they had made along the way. They would invite independent auditors to examine their books, proving they had nothing to hide. And they would challenge other corporations to follow their lead, to prioritize ethical practices and community investment. As the meeting adjourned, Julian pulled Sarah aside. "There's one more thing we need to do," he said quietly. "It's time we found out exactly who we're up against." "I think it's Blackstone, but we need proof." Sarah nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "I might have an idea about that. Leave it to me." That evening, as Julian prepared for a primetime television interview where he would begin implementing their new strategy, Sarah met with an unlikely ally in a quiet coffee shop downtown. "Mrs. Carter," the man said as he slid into the booth across from her. "I have to admit I was surprised to get your call." Sarah studied the man before her. David Chen had been one of the executives who had left Cartwright Industries in protest when Julian announced the company's new direction. But something about his departure had always struck Sarah as odd. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Chen," Sarah said. "I'll get straight to the point. We believe someone is orchestrating these attacks on Cartwright Industries, someone with inside knowledge of our operations." Chen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And you think I'm involved?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I think you know who is involved. Know who? And I think you left, not because you disagreed with our new direction, but because you knew what was coming and didn't want to be part of it." For a long moment, Chen was silent, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's Blackstone. He approached several of us, offered us positions in his company if we helped him take down Cartwright. I couldn't do it, but others." As Chen continued to talk, sharing names and details, Sarah felt a mixture of anger and vindication. They finally had the proof they needed. But more than that, they had an ally, someone willing to stand up and do the right thing. Across town, Lily was facing her own challenges. Word had gotten out about her role in Cartwright Industries' new initiatives, and not everyone at school was supportive. As she walked down the hallway, she could hear the whispers, see the pointed looks. "Hey, charity case," a voice called out. Lily turned to see a group of older students approaching. "Must be nice having a rich CEO wrapped around your finger. Bet you think you're really special, huh?" Lily felt her cheeks burn, a mixture of embarrassment and anger rising within her. But before she could respond, she felt someone step up beside her. "She is special," Max's voice rang out, clear and defiant. "She's braver than all of you combined. While you're worrying about your next shopping trip, she's out there trying to make a difference." One by one, other students began to gather around Lily and Max. Brittany, the former bully turned ally. Kids from the debate club who had been inspired by Lily's presentation. Even some of the teachers watched from doorways, silent but supportive. The older students, faced with this unexpected show of solidarity, muttered and backed away. Lily looked around at her friends, her heart swelling with gratitude and determination. "Thanks, guys," she said softly. Then, with a glint in her eye reminiscent of her mother's, she added, "Now who wants to help me plan our next campaign?" As the day drew to a close, Julian, Sarah, and Lily once again found themselves gathered in Julian's office. They shared the events of the day, the new strategy, Sarah's meeting with Chen, Lily's experience at school. "We're making progress," Julian said, a cautious optimism in his voice. "But Blackstone won't give up easily. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next." Sarah nodded, her hand finding Julian's in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "We will be, together." Lily, watching them, felt a sense of pride and purpose stronger than she had ever known. This wasn't just about saving a company anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, about showing the world that compassion and success could go hand in hand. As they looked out over the city, the lights twinkling like stars in the gathering dusk, each of them silently renewed their commitment to the fight ahead. They had weathered the first storm, had stood firm in the face of adversity, and though greater challenges lay ahead, they faced them not with fear, but with hope and determination. For in their unity, in their unwavering belief in the power of doing good, they had found a strength that no corporate raider, no smear campaign, no amount of adversity could shake. They were ready for whatever came next, ready to continue their fight to change the world, one ethical decision at a time. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Julian Cartwright's office as he stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. His face was a mask of concentration as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Yes, I understand the risks," he said, his voice firm. "But I also believe in the potential rewards. Thank you for your support." As he ended the call, Sarah entered the office, a cautious smile on her face. "Good news?" Julian nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "The Sullivan Foundation has agreed to partner with us on the Urban Renewal Project. They're impressed by our commitment to ethical business practices, despite the recent challenges. Sarah's smile widened. That's fantastic, Julian. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Their moment of celebration was interrupted by a knock at the door. David entered, his face grave. Sir, you need to see this. He handed Julian a tablet open to a financial news site. The headline made Julian's heart sink. Cartwright Industries faces class action lawsuit. Shareholders allege mismanagement and fraud. Julian's jaw clenched as he scanned the article. This is Blackstone's work. He's rallying the shareholders who are unhappy with our new direction. Sarah read over his shoulder, her expression hardening. We knew this might happen. But we've prepared for it, Julian. We have the truth on our side. Julian nodded, squaring his shoulders. You're right. David, get the legal team in here. We need to craft our response. As the day progressed, Julian and his team worked tirelessly to address the lawsuit. They gathered evidence of the company's financial health, prepared statements for the press, and reached out to supportive shareholders. Meanwhile, across town, Lily was facing her own battle. She stood before her class, presenting the results of their homeless youth awareness campaign. Thanks to your efforts, Lily said, her voice clear and confident, we've raised over $50,000 for local shelters. But more importantly, we've started a conversation. People are talking about youth homelessness, really seeing it for the first time. As she finished her presentation, Lily was met with enthusiastic applause from her classmates and a beaming smile from her teacher. But as she returned to her seat, she couldn't help but notice a group of students in the back, whispering and casting angry glances her way. After class, as Lily was gathering her things, one of these students approached her. You think you're so special, don't you? The girl sneered. With your rich uncle and your charity work, but we know the truth. Your mom's company is stealing from people, and you're just a part of their PR stunt. Lily felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment, but before she could respond, Max stepped in. Back off, Jessica, he said, his voice low but firm. You don't know what you're talking about. As Jessica stormed off, Lily turned to Max with a grateful smile. Thanks, she said softly. Max shrugged, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. That's what friends are for, right? Don't let them get to you, Lily. What you're doing, it's important. Lily nodded, squaring her shoulders. She thought of her mother and Julian fighting their own battles. If they could stand strong in the face of adversity, so could she. Back at Cartwright Tower, Sarah was in the midst of a challenging meeting with community leaders. The room was tense, filled with worried faces and pointed questions. Mrs. Carter, one woman said, her voice tinged with fear. We've heard rumors that Cartwright Industries is in trouble. What happens to our programs if the company goes under? Sarah took a deep breath, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. I understand your concerns, she said, but I want to assure you, Cartwright Industries is not going anywhere. Yes, we're facing challenges, but we're also stronger than ever because we have people like you supporting us. She went on to outline their plans, their commitment to the community, and the safeguards they had put in place to ensure the continuation of their programs. Slowly, she could see the tension in the room easing, replaced by cautious optimism. As the meeting concluded, one of the community leaders approached Sarah. You know, he said quietly, when Cartwright Industries first announced these initiatives, I was skeptical, thought it was just another corporate PR move. But seeing you here, hearing your passion, I believe in what you're doing, and I think others will too if they get the chance to see it firsthand. Sarah felt a surge of hope at his words. Thank you, she said warmly. That means more than you know. As evening fell, Julian, Sarah, and Lily gathered in Julian's office, sharing the events of their day. Despite the challenges they had faced, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. We're making progress, Julian said, a determined glint in his eye. Slowly but surely, people are starting to see the value in what we're doing. Sarah nodded in agreement. It's not just about defending the company anymore. We're changing minds, challenging the way people think about business and social responsibility. Lily, who had been quiet, spoke up. Do you think we can really do it? Change things, I mean. Sometimes it feels like the whole world is against us. Julian and Sarah exchanged a look, both struck by the maturity in Lily's question. Julian knelt down to meet Lily's eyes. Lily, he said softly, change is never easy. There will always be people who resist it, who fight to keep things the way they are, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. Every person we help, every mind we change, it all adds up, and someday it will tip the balance. As they looked out over the city skyline, each lost in their own thoughts, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but together they were ready to face whatever came their way. Little did they know the greatest test of their resolve was just around the corner. The tension in the air was palpable as Julian Cartwright strode into the emergency board meeting. The faces that greeted him were a mix of concern, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their fears pressing down on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut, "I know you're all aware of the challenges we're facing, the lawsuit, the media scrutiny, the drop in our stock price, but I'm here to tell you that Cartwright Industries is stronger than ever." A scoff from the end of the table interrupted him. It was Gerald Thompson, the CFO who had been the most vocal opponent of Julian's new direction. "Stronger?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our stock is in free fall, Julian. Major investors are jumping ship, and now we hear rumors that Blackstone is preparing a hostile takeover bid. How exactly are we stronger?" Julian met Gerald's gaze steadily. "We're stronger because we're fighting for something more than just profits. We're creating real, lasting value, not just for our shareholders, but for our employees, our communities, and yes, even for our planet." He went on to outline the progress they had made, the partnerships they had formed, the lives they had changed, the positive press they had begun to generate. As he spoke, he could see some of the board members nodding along, their expressions softening, but Gerald wasn't finished. "That's all very noble, Julian, but nobility doesn't pay the bills. The fact is, your little experiment in corporate social responsibility is driving this company into the ground. I move that we remove Julian Cartwright as CEO and return Cartwright Industries to its core mission of maximizing shareholder value." The room erupted into chaos, voices raised in argument, accusations flying back and forth. Julian stood silent at the head of the table, his mind racing. He had known this moment might come, but facing it was still a shock. Just as the situation seemed about to spiral out of control, the door burst open. Sarah Carter strode in, her face set in determination. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "but there's something you all need to see." She moved to the screen at the end of the room, quickly pulling up a series of documents. "These are internal memos from Blackstone Group," she explained. "They detail a coordinated plan to undermine Cartwright Industries. Everything from planting false stories in the media to manipulating our stock price." The room fell silent as the board members absorbed this information. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "But that's not all. We've also uncovered evidence of illegal practices within Blackstone Group, insider trading, bribery, environmental violations. They're attacking us because they're afraid that if our model of ethical business succeeds, it will expose their own corrupt practices." Julian watched in awe as Sarah laid out the evidence, answering questions with confidence and clarity. This was not the same woman who had timidly entered his office just months ago. She had grown into a force to be reckoned with. As Sarah finished her presentation, Julian stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have a choice to make. We can give in to fear, abandon our principles, and become just another soulless corporation. Or we can stand firm, fight back against this attack, and show the world that there's a better way to do business." He looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes. "I believe in this company. I believe in our mission. And I'm asking you to believe too. Stand with me, and together we'll not only save Cartwright Industries, we'll transform the very nature of business itself." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, one of the older board members stood up. "I've been in business for over 40 years, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "and I've never been prouder to be part of a company than I am right now. You have my support, Julian." One by one, other board members stood, voicing their support. Even Gerald, though he remained seated, gave a grudging nod. "You're either brilliant or insane, Cartwright," he muttered, "but I guess we're about to find out which." As the meeting adjourned, Julian pulled Sarah aside. "That was incredible," he said softly. "You saved us." Sarah smiled, a mix of pride and determination in her eyes. "We saved us, Julian, and this is just the beginning." Across town, Lily was facing her own moment of truth. She stood on the stage of the school auditorium, looking out at a sea of faces. The assembly that had been cancelled weeks ago was finally happening, but on a much grander scale. Students, parents, teachers, and even local media filled the seats. Lily took a deep breath, thinking of all she had been through, all she had learned. She thought of her mother and Julian fighting their own battles, and then she began to speak. "A few months ago I was homeless," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I was scared, hungry, and I felt invisible. But then something amazing happened. People started to see me, really see me, and they didn't just offer help, they offered hope." She went on to talk about her experiences, about the work Cartwright Industries was doing, about the power of compassion and community. As she spoke, she could see the impact of her words. People were listening, really listening. As Lily concluded her speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. She saw tears in the eyes of adults, fierce determination on the faces of her fellow students. She had done more than just tell her story. She had ignited a spark of change. Later that evening, as Julian, Sarah, and Lily gathered in Julian's office, there was a sense of cautious triumph in the air. They had faced major challenges and come out stronger, but they knew the real battle was just beginning. "Blackstone won't give up easily," Julian said, his voice grave. "Now that we've exposed their plans, they'll be even more desperate. We need to be prepared for anything." Sarah nodded, her hand finding Julian's in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "We will be. Together." Lily, watching them, felt a surge of pride and determination. "We've come this far," she said. "We can't give up now." As they looked out over the city, the lights twinkling like stars in the gathering dusk, each of them silently renewed their commitment to the fight ahead. They had weathered the storm, had stood firm in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And though greater challenges lay ahead, they faced them not with fear but with hope and unshakable resolve. For in their unity, in their unwavering belief in the power of doing good, they had found a strength that no corporate raider, no smear campaign, no amount of adversity could break. They were ready for the final battle, ready to fight for their vision of a world where business could be a force for good. The stage was set for a showdown that would not only determine the fate of Cartwright Industries, but could potentially reshape the entire landscape of corporate America. And at the heart of it all stood an unlikely trio. A visionary CEO, a former homeless mother, and a brave little girl, united in their determination to prove that compassion and success could go hand in hand. As night fell over New York City, the real fight was just beginning. The New York skyline glittered in the early morning light as Julian Cartwright stood at the window of his office, his reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the city he loved. In just a few hours, he would face the fight of his life, a shareholders' meeting that would determine the fate of Cartwright Industries. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning to see Sarah enter, a determined set to her jaw. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Julian nodded, his gaze returning to the city below. "As ready as I'll ever be. But Sarah, no matter what happens today, I want you to know." She cut him off with a gentle hand on his arm. "I know, Julian, and we're in this together, remember? All of us." As if on cue, the door opened again and Lily poked her head in. "Mom, Mr. Cartwright, the car's here." Julian couldn't help but smile at the sight of Lily, dressed in a smart blazer that made her look older than her years. "Well then," he said, straightening his tie, "I suppose it's showtime." The ride to the convention center where the shareholders' meeting would be held was tense but determined. Julian reviewed his notes one last time, while Sarah fielded last-minute calls and messages. Lily sat quietly, her young face serious as she watched the city flash by outside the window. As they pulled up to the convention center, they were met by a sea of reporters and photographers. Flashbulbs popped and questions were shouted as they made their way inside, Julian's hand protectively on Lily's shoulder, Sarah bringing up the rear. Inside, the main hall was packed. Shareholders, both friendly and hostile, filled the seats. At the front of the room, Julian could see Richard Blackstone, a smug smile playing on his lips. As Julian took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. He looked out over the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders of Cartwright Industries, we stand at a crossroads today, not just for our company, but for the very nature of business itself." He went on to outline the journey of the past few months, the challenges they had faced, the lives they had changed, the new paradigm of ethical business they were pioneering. "We've been accused of being dreamers, of sacrificing profits for ideals," Julian continued, his voice growing stronger. "But I ask you, what is the true purpose of business? Is it merely to make money no matter the cost to our communities, our environment, our very souls? Or is it to create value, real, lasting value that enriches not just our shareholders, but our world?" As Julian spoke, he could see the mood in the room shifting. Even those who had come in skeptical were listening intently. But then, just as he was building to his conclusion, a voice rang out from the audience. "Pretty words, Cartwright," Blackstone called, standing up. "But words don't pay dividends. The fact is, your ethical approach has tanked this company's stock. You're destroying shareholder value with your misguided idealism." A murmur ran through the crowd. Julian felt his heart sink as he saw some shareholders nodding in agreement. But before he could respond, another voice spoke up. "That's not true," Sarah said, stepping up to the microphone. "And we can prove it." With calm confidence, Sarah began to present the data they had gathered. She showed how Cartwright Industries' new initiatives were actually opening up new markets, improving employee retention and productivity, and positioning the company for long-term sustainable growth. "Yes, our stock price has taken a hit in the short term," Sarah acknowledged, "but that's not because our strategy is failing. It's because of a coordinated attack on our company, an attack orchestrated by none other than Richard Blackstone and his associates." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations as Sarah presented the evidence they had gathered, the leaked memos, the financial records showing Blackstone's manipulation of Cartwright Industries' stock. Blackstone leapt to his feet, his face red with anger. "This is slander," he shouted. "You have no proof." "Actually," a new voice cut in, "they do." All eyes turned to see David Chen, Julian's former executive, walking down the aisle. In his hands, he carried a thick folder. "I was part of Blackstone's plan," Chen said, his voice ringing out in the stunned silence. "I helped him gather inside information on Cartwright Industries, but I couldn't go through with it. What Julian and his team are doing, it's important, it matters, and I have all the documentation to prove Blackstone's illegal activities." For a moment, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then chaos erupted. Shareholders began shouting questions. Reporters who had snuck in were frantically taking notes. And in the midst of it all, Blackstone stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and fury. Julian raised his hands, calling for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you've heard the evidence, you've seen what we're trying to accomplish. Now, the choice is yours. Will you stand with us and be part of a new era of ethical, sustainable business? Or will you cling to the old ways even when they've been exposed as corrupt and destructive?" As the shareholders began to discuss among themselves, Julian stepped back from the podium, his heart racing. Sarah came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. Lily joined them, her young face a mix of anxiety and hope. "What happens now?" Lily whispered. Julian squeezed her shoulder gently. "Now, we wait, and we hope that we've done enough to show people a better way forward." As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room was palpable. Julian, Sarah, and Lily stood together, a united front facing whatever the future might hold. They had fought with everything they had laid bare their vision for a more compassionate, ethical form of capitalism. Now, it was up to the shareholders to decide whether that vision would become a reality or whether it would be crushed under the weight of old prejudices and fears. As the room buzzed with heated discussions and last-minute deliberations, the fate of Cartwright Industries, and perhaps the future of business itself, hung in the balance. The tension in the convention center was electric as the shareholders of Cartwright Industries prepared to cast their votes. Julian, Sarah, and Lily stood together at the front of the room, a united front against the storm that had threatened to tear them apart. As the voting began, Julian felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see Lily, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety. On his other side, Sarah stood tall, her chin raised in defiance of the challenges they had faced. In that moment, Julian realized that no matter the outcome, he had already won something far more valuable than any business deal. He had found a family. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the votes were tallied. Julian could see Blackstone pacing at the back of the room, his face a mask of barely contained rage. The once mighty businessman now looked small and desperate, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his exposed misdeeds. Finally, the head of the election committee stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the man who held their fate in his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the hall, "I have the results of the shareholder vote." Julian held his breath, feeling Sarah's hand tighten on his arm. By a margin of 62% to 38%, the shareholders have voted to support the current leadership and direction of Cartwright Industries. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, as if a dam had broken, cheers erupted. Supporters rushed forward, surrounding Julian, Sarah, and Lily in a sea of congratulations and relief. As Julian shook hands and accepted congratulations, he caught sight of Blackstone slipping out a side door, his dreams of a hostile takeover shattered. But there was no time to dwell on defeated enemies. There was work to be done. Stepping back up to the microphone, Julian raised his hands for quiet. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for your faith in us, in our vision. But this isn't just a victory for Cartwright Industries. This is a victory for a new way of doing business, a way that values people and planet alongside profit." He went on to outline his plans for the future: expanded community outreach programs, increased investment in sustainable technologies, and a commitment to transparency and ethical practices that would set a new standard for corporate America. As Julian spoke, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the transformation she had witnessed. The man who had once embodied the cold, profit-driven face of capitalism now spoke with passion about social responsibility and community investment, and she had played a part in that transformation. When Julian finished his speech, Sarah stepped up to the microphone. "I'd like to say something, if I may," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "A few months ago, I was homeless, desperate, with no hope for the future. Cartwright Industries didn't just give me a job, they gave me a purpose. They showed me that business can be a force for good in the world. And now I want to extend that same hope to others." She went on to announce the creation of a new division within Cartwright Industries, dedicated to providing job training and support for homeless individuals and at-risk youth. As she spoke, she could see tears in the eyes of many in the audience, and she felt a surge of pride and determination. As Sarah stepped back, it was Lily's turn to speak. The young girl approached the microphone, looking small but determined in front of the crowd of adults. "I used to think that grown-ups had all the answers," Lily began, her voice clear and strong. "But what I've learned is that sometimes it takes a child to remind adults of what really matters. Kindness matters. Fairness matters. Doing the right thing matters." She went on to talk about her experiences, about the friends she had made and the lives she had seen change through Cartwright Industries initiatives. As she spoke, Julian and Sarah exchanged a glance, both overwhelmed with pride for the remarkable young woman Lily had become. As the meeting drew to a close, Julian, Sarah, and Lily found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Reporters clamored for interviews, shareholders offered congratulations, and even some of Julian's former critics approached to express their newfound support. But amidst the chaos, the three of them found a moment of quiet together. "We did it," Sarah said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Julian nodded, pulling both Sarah and Lily into a hug. "We did. All of us, together." Lily looked up at them both, a mischievous glint in her eye. "So, does this mean I get to be CEO next?" Julian and Sarah burst out laughing, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. As their laughter echoed through the hall, it felt like a new chapter was beginning, not just for them but for the entire business world. Outside, the New York sky was clearing after days of rain, the sun breaking through the clouds. It seemed a fitting metaphor for the bright future that lay ahead. Cartwright Industries had not just weathered the storm, they had emerged stronger, more purposeful, and ready to lead the charge into a new era of ethical, compassionate capitalism. As they left the convention center, stepping out into the sunlight, Julian, Sarah, and Lily knew that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new battles to fight, but they would face them together, armed with the knowledge that one small act of kindness could spark a revolution, that one company could change the world, and that even in the darkest times, hope could flourish. The future was bright, full of possibility. And they were ready to meet it head-on, united in their vision of a better world. A world where business could be a force for good, where compassion and success could go hand in hand, and where even the smallest voice could make a difference. As they walked towards their waiting car, Lily between them, holding both their hands, Julian and Sarah exchanged a glance over her head. No words were needed. They had found more than success. They had found a family, a purpose, and a shared dream of a better tomorrow. And that, they knew, was the greatest victory of all. 5 years had passed since that fateful shareholders' meeting, and the world of business had never been the same. Cartwright Industries' bold move towards ethical capitalism had sent shockwaves through corporate America, inspiring a wave of change that few could have predicted. Julian Cartwright stood at the podium of a grand auditorium, addressing a crowd of eager young faces. It was the annual Ethical Business Summit, an event that had grown from a small gathering in a community center to a global phenomenon, attracting future leaders from around the world. "When we began this journey," Julian said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "many said it couldn't be done. They said that business and ethics were incompatible, that profit and social responsibility couldn't coexist. But look at us now." He gestured to the screens behind him, displaying graphs and charts that told a remarkable story. Cartwright Industries' profits had not only recovered, but soared, as consumers and investors alike flocked to support their ethical practices. But more importantly, their success had sparked a revolution. Today, over 60% of Fortune 500 companies have adopted similar ethical business models, Julian continued. "We're seeing a shift in corporate culture that's transforming lives, communities, and our planet. And it all started with a simple idea, that doing good and doing well don't have to be mutually exclusive." As Julian concluded his speech to thunderous applause, he caught sight of Sarah in the wings, beaming with pride. She was no longer just the head of community outreach. She had become a powerful advocate for corporate social responsibility, her own story inspiring countless others to believe in the possibility of change. After the speech, as Julian mingled with attendees, a young woman approached him, her eyes shining with admiration. "Mr. Cartwright," she said, "your work has been such an inspiration. I'm starting my own social enterprise, and I was wondering if you had any advice." Julian smiled warmly. "The best advice I can give you is something I learned from a very wise young girl," he said. "Remember that kindness matters, fairness matters, and doing the right thing always matters. Stay true to those principles and you can't go wrong." As the young woman walked away, visibly moved, Sarah joined Julian. "Still quoting Lily after all these years," she said with a fond smile. Julian chuckled. "Well, she did start it all in a way. Speaking of which, have you heard from her?" Sarah nodded, her eyes twinkling with pride. "She just called. She's on her way back from the Youth Empowerment Conference in Geneva. Apparently her speech was a hit. They're already asking her to come back next year." Julian shook his head in wonder. Lily, now a poised and passionate young woman of 17, had become a force for change in her own right. Her experiences had driven her to become a powerful advocate for homeless youth, and her voice was increasingly sought after on the global stage. As they left the auditorium, Julian and Sarah walked hand in hand through the bustling streets of New York. The city felt different now. There was a palpable sense of hope and purpose in the air. Where once there had been shuttered storefronts and forgotten corners, now there were thriving community centers, green spaces, and innovative social enterprises. They passed a sleek building with the Cartwright Industries logo prominently displayed. But beneath it was another sign that made them both smile: home of the Lily Carter Youth Empowerment Program. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah mused as they walked, "what would have happened if Lily hadn't burst into your office that day? If we hadn't taken that leap of faith?" Julian was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think about it often," he admitted. "We were all lost in our own ways. Me in my pursuit of profit at any cost. You in your struggle to survive. Lily in her loneliness and fear. But together, we found a new path. We found purpose." As they continued their walk, they passed countless examples of the change they had helped to create. A formerly abandoned lot now housed a thriving urban garden, providing fresh produce and job training to the local community. A state-of-the-art recycling facility stood where a polluting factory had once belched smoke into the sky. And everywhere there were signs of a new kind of prosperity, one that lifted all boats, not just the yachts of the wealthy. But it wasn't just the physical changes that struck them. It was the shift in attitude they encountered everywhere they went. People smiled more, engaged with their neighbors, took pride in their communities. The culture of cutthroat competition that had once defined the city was giving way to one of collaboration and mutual support. As they reached their destination, a small cozy restaurant where they were meeting Lily for dinner, Julian and Sarah paused for a moment, taking in the scene around them. "We've come a long way," Sarah said softly, squeezing Julian's hand. Julian nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "We have, but the journey's not over yet. There's still so much to do, so many lives to touch." Just then they spotted Lily approaching, her face lighting up as she saw them. As she reached them, she pulled them both into a warm embrace. "Ready for the next adventure?" Lily asked with a grin, her eyes sparkling with the same determination they had seen in her as a child. Julian and Sarah exchanged a glance, both feeling a surge of love and pride for the remarkable young woman before them, and for the unlikely family they had become. "Always," they said in unison, and together they stepped into the restaurant, ready to plan their next move in the ongoing revolution of compassionate capitalism. As they settled into their seats, the conversation flowing easily between them, none of them could have predicted the challenges and triumphs that still lay ahead, but they faced the future with hope, with purpose, and with the unshakable belief that together they could continue to change the world, one ethical decision at a time. The years rolled by, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs for Julian, Sarah, and Lily. As Cartwright Industries continued to grow and evolve, so too did its impact on the world. On a bright spring morning, 10 years after their initial victory, Julian stood on the roof of Cartwright Tower, looking out over a city transformed. The New York skyline, once a testament to corporate greed and inequality, now told a different story. Green rooftops and solar panels glinted in the sunlight, while parks and community spaces dotted the urban landscape. Sarah joined him, wrapping her arm around his waist. "Quite a view, isn't it?" she said softly. Julian nodded, his eyes misting slightly. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Lily, now a poised and accomplished woman of 22. She burst through the roof access door, her face alight with excitement. "Mum! Dad!" she called out, for that was how she had come to think of Julian over the years. "You won't believe this." She thrust a tablet into their hands, displaying a news article. The headline read, "United Nations adopts Cartwright Principles for Ethical Business Practices." "It's official," Lily said, her voice brimming with pride. "The model we created is going global. Every member nation has agreed to implement these guidelines for corporate social responsibility." Julian and Sarah read the article in awe. The Cartwright Principles, as they had come to be known, outlined a comprehensive approach to ethical business practices, emphasizing environmental stewardship, community investment, and equitable labor practices. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Julian pulled both Sarah and Lily into a tight embrace. "This is your legacy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. You showed me the way, showed the world that there was a better path." As they stood there holding each other and looking out over the city they had helped to transform, each of them reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Julian thought back to the cutthroat businessman he had once been, so focused on profit that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Sarah remembered the desperation and fear she had felt as a homeless mother, never dreaming that she would one day help shape global policy. And Lily, her eyes shining with unshed tears, thought of the scared little girl she had been, and how that fear had turned into a fierce determination to make the world a better place. Their reverie was interrupted by the arrival of David, Julian's longtime assistant, now a trusted member of the Cartwright Industries leadership team. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but you're needed downstairs. The new interns from the Lily Carter Youth Empowerment Program have arrived." They made their way to the lobby, where a group of young people stood, their faces a mixture of nervousness and excitement. These were youth who had once been homeless, who had faced seemingly insurmountable odds, Now they stood on the threshold of a new life, full of possibility. Lily stepped forward to greet them, her voice warm and encouraging. "Welcome to Cartwright Industries," she said. "I know you might feel out of place here, like you don't belong. I felt that way once too, but let me tell you something. You belong here. Your experiences, your struggles, your dreams, they're valuable. They're what will help us continue to grow, to innovate, to make this world a little bit better every day." As Lily spoke, Julian and Sarah exchanged a glance, both overwhelmed with pride. They saw in these young interns the same spark of potential they had seen in Lily all those years ago. And they knew that the legacy they had built would continue, passed on to a new generation of ethical leaders. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table in the cozy apartment that had become their home, Julian raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And to the family that showed me what really matters in life." Sarah and Lily raised their glasses, echoing the toast. As they clinked their glasses together, each of them felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unlikely journey that had brought them together, and for the countless lives they had touched along the way. Outside, the sun was setting over New York City, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The Cartwright Tower stood tall among the skyscrapers, its green initiatives gleaming in the fading light. But more than just a symbol of corporate success, it now stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of compassion, integrity, and the unwavering belief that business could be a force for good in the world. As night fell and the city lights began to twinkle, Julian, Sarah, and Lily continued to chat and laugh, planning new initiatives and dreaming of the changes yet to come. They knew that there would always be challenges to face, new battles to fight, but they would face them together, armed with the knowledge that one small act of kindness could spark a revolution, that one company could change the world, and that even in the darkest times, hope could flourish. Their story, a tale of an unlikely family forged in adversity, united by a shared vision of a better world, had become legend in the business world and beyond. But for Julian, Sarah, and Lily, it was simply their life, their purpose, their ongoing mission to prove that compassion and success could go hand in hand. As the night deepened and the stars emerged above the city skyline, the warmth of their shared love and purpose filled the room. They had not just changed a company or an industry, they had changed the very notion of what business could be. And in doing so, they had changed themselves, each other, and the world. The legacy of Cartwright Industries would live on, not just in corporate boardrooms or economic policies, but in the countless lives touched, the communities transformed, and the hope ignited in hearts around the globe. It was a legacy of compassion, of ethical leadership, of unwavering commitment to doing what was right. But most of all, it was a legacy of love, the love of a family that had found each other against all odds and had used that love to light the way towards a brighter future for all.